Hi everybody, welcome back for another day of the Read Aloud. Today is Team Jersey Day, and you can see I have my beloved Packers on. Aaron Rodgers. Whoops, my cheese head came off. Gotta wear the cheese head if you're a true Packers fan. You can see it says Rodgers in the back. And JD is also a little guest appearance here. And what jersey do you have on?
My baseball team.
And turn around. There's his baseball team. So you can see we have my little Easter eggs hung up around the fireplace here, getting ready for Easter. We are on chapter 9, and we will start a read aloud. I hope everybody's doing good today, and I hope you are wearing your team jerseys. Today's chapter is chapter 9, and it's called Chess. Mrs. Margaret Chatham had been principal of Lincoln Elementary School for 18 years. She knew Mr. and Mrs. Allen because they had all served together on the building committee when the old Lincoln School was torn down and the new one was built 6 years ago. When she telephoned the afternoon of October 1st to set up the meeting, Mrs. Chatham had asked Nick to be there too. It was 6:30 when she knocked, and Nick opened the door. "Good evening, Nick," she said. No smile. "Hi, Mrs. Chatham," said Nick, backing away as she filled the doorway. She was a large person, as tall as Nick's dad, with wide shoulders. Nick guessed she would play linebacker on a football team because that's what his dad played in college. "Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Allen," she said, stepping into the living room. She was wearing a long black raincoat with a red silk scarf tied loosely around her neck. She kept her coat on, but took off the scarf and tucked it into her left pocket. She shook hands stiffly with both of Nick's parents before sitting down in the chair to the left of the couch. Nick's mom and dad sat on the couch, and Nick sat on the rocking chair that faced Mrs. Chatham across the low coffee table. "This is not an easy visit for me. We are having some trouble at school, and it appears that Nick is in the middle of it." Then, while Nick's parents listened, Mrs. Chatham laid out the story as she saw it. Nick encouraging the other kids to use his new word, Mrs. Granger forbidding it, the ruined 5th grade class picture, hundreds of kids staying after school, and the general feeling that there was a rebellion at school with no one respecting the rules anymore. Here's a picture of the principal with Nick's parents and Nick. It says, "The game was not over." We also have another little guest that came here, Jack, and he has his jersey on. Turn around. See his name on the back.
And that cut my face.
He ran into the tree the other day and got a little cut on his face.
Actually, a big cut.
Big
it's
cut.
right here.
Nick watched his mom and dad while Mrs. Chatham talked, looking from one face to another. His dad was listening carefully, nodding and frowning. He looked embarrassed about the trouble, but his mom looked kind of annoyed. And Mrs. Chatham finished her story. Nick's mom was the first one to speak. "But doesn't all this seem like a lot of fuss about something pretty silly?" Nick sat quietly, but in his mind he shouted, "Hooray for Mom! Hooray for mothers everywhere!" His mom wasn't annoyed with him. She was annoyed with Mrs. Granger, maybe even annoyed with Mrs. Chatham. This was getting interesting. Mrs. Allen was still talking to the principal. "I mean, is there really any harm in the children making up a funny word and saying it? Does there have to be a rule that a word like this may not be used?" Mrs. Chatham sighed and said, "Yes, I suppose it does seem silly, but Mrs. Granger thinks that it's rather like keeping children from saying ain't. There have to be standards. That's why we have dictionaries. And really, the problem isn't so much the word itself. It's the lack of respect for authority." Mr. Allen said, "Mrs. Granger's right about that. There have to be standards. We can't have kids walking around saying ain't, can we?" And that's when Nick's mom piped in. And that's when Nick piped in. "You know that big dictionary in Mrs. Granger's room? The word ain't is right there in the book. I looked it up, and there it was. I don't see why I can't use a word if it's in the dictionary. Mrs. Granger even said that her big dictionary was the law." Nick looked from face to face to face. That stumped them all. He had just launched a first-class thought grenade. "Well, yes, but, well, as I said, the word ain't, and even the word frindle, these are not the real issue here," said Mrs. Chatham. Mrs. Allen said, "Well, I think the real issue is Mrs. Granger's reaction to a harmless little experiment with language. It's an overreaction. Don't you think so, Tom?" And Mrs. Allen looked right at her husband. It was Mr. Allen's turn to look from face to face to face. He was lost. "Yes, well, sure, I guess so. I mean, it's not like anybody's been hurt. I mean, it's not like vandalism or stealing or something like that. His sentence trailed off, and he rubbed his chin and stared thoughtfully through the window on the wall behind Mrs. Chatham. And while the three grown-ups sat there in an uncomfortable moment of silence, Nick had a sudden vision of what was really going on here. It was a chess game. Nick against Mrs. Granger. Mrs. Granger had just tried to end the game by using her queen, Mrs. Chatham, and her black raincoat, the Black Queen. Nick didn't know it until the attack was underway, but he had a powerful defender of his own, the good old mom, the White Queen. And the game was not over. It would go on until there was a winner and a loser. Mrs. Chatham didn't stay much longer. There was a little more talk back and forth across the chessboard about how children have a right to explore new ideas, about the importance of respecting teachers and the work they do, about everybody needing to keep up standards and make school a safe place to learn. Then, Mr. Allen offered Mrs. Chatham some coffee and banana bread, but she said, "No thanks, I really must be going now." She thanked Nick's parents, and they thanked her. Nick opened the door and said, "Good night, Mrs. Chatham." Then the Black Queen put on her red scarf and walked off into the October twilight. "Nick, I think we better talk a little more about this," said his mom, sitting back down on the couch. "If I find out that you've been disrespectful to Mrs. Granger or any other teacher at school, then you will really be in big trouble." I haven't been disrespectful, honest. I did get everybody starting to use my word, but like you said, it's not hurting anybody. And I'm sorry if me and Dave and Peter got everybody to ask Mrs. Granger to borrow a Frindle. That was mean, I guess. But she started by making kids stay after school and write 100 sentences just for saying my word once. All the kids like to use my word. It's just fun, that's all. "Well," said Nick's dad, "if it gets everyone upset and makes the principal come talk to your mother and me, then it must not be fun for everybody, is it? And I think you should tell all your friends to knock it off right now. I mean, tomorrow." Nick shook his head. "I can't, Dad. It won't work. It's a real word now. It used to be just mine, but not anymore. If I knew how to stop it, I think I probably would. But I can't." And Nick looked at both of their faces to see if that idea was sinking in. It was like I said, I won't be disrespectful, but I do like my word. And I guess now we're going to have to see what happens. And the chessmen, Nick's king and queen, had to agree. The game would go on. That was the end of chapter 9. I hope you enjoyed it. I can't wait to see pictures of you in your team jersey. Make sure you tell your parents to take a picture of you and post it onto our Facebook page. And I hope you're having a great Tuesday. See you guys later. Bye. Love you.